Joker will inspire incels to acts of terrible violence. This film will bring about the end of society as we know it and start a violent revolution. This film is dangerous. This all sounds pretty ridiculous, but that was the feeling many had reading discussions of the film prior to its release. There was a sense that people were a little worried and perhaps even scared about the film. It seemed like it had crossed a line. It had entered murky ethical waters, and people had genuine concerns about that. The reaction to the buzz surrounding the film seemed to fall into two camps. One that thought perhaps there were issues with a film that sought to humanize a terrorist in a time where multiple similar terrorists had committed terrible evil, and another that dismissed the concerns as yet another moral panic. The same sort of lame, predictable responses that even the least offensive art seems to garner. I'll admit, I was in the latter camp. I, perhaps naively, thought the film would explore the origins of a famous villain in a sympathetic light, but would shy away from encouraging the audience to inhabit the mindset of that villain. I thought the early reactions were a mixture of moral panic that critics had to look at a film that didn't make the character out to be a black and white villain, and a severe discomfort born of recent events. Here, I lacked perspective. I live in Australia. We haven't had a recent mass shooting or rampage committed by the sorts of people critics were being reminded of while watching Joker, and I didn't quite understand how the film was supposed to be interpreted in that light. And then I watched it. I thought Joker was a pretty good film. While it did have some moments, particularly in the very beginning, that didn't work for me, I really liked it overall. Some will say it's just Taxi Driver with a lick of face paint, and while that's fair, I liked it a lot more than I did Taxi Driver. Others will say its politics are weak, muddled, or even incoherent, and that's also fair, but it was a film rooted in the perspective of someone whose politics are incoherent. It's also a film that is perhaps a little irresponsible when viewed in a certain light. I don't know if it's entirely fair to view it in that light, but when a murderer ends up on the news, their manifesto isn't published. Their demands are not met, or rather, they shouldn't be. Dangerous people should not be allowed a platform to spread their dangerous ideas. Herostratus burned down the Temple of Artemis in a bid for everlasting fame. Despite being executed for doing it with a law being passed to forbid speaking of or recording his name, he is still remembered today because Theopompus broke that law and recorded his name. Murder is of course a far worse crime than arson, and I believe the death penalty is fundamentally wrong, but those that perpetrate such crimes shouldn't be named or given a platform. I think it's an ethical imperative they shouldn't be allowed their herostratic fame. Ah, you say, but this isn't a dangerous man. This is a character in a movie. It's fiction. It's art. That it made you feel uncomfortable is perhaps the very intention of the film. Art shouldn't be burdened with such moral qualms and ethical requirements. On that last point is where I come to an uncomfortable position. While I was in the camp that dismissed the claims before watching it, and my position did change after watching it, I'm still not entirely convinced by those that claim the film is, in definite terms, irresponsible or dangerous. I'm glad to see a film exploring the themes it does. I applaud how strictly they kept the film within the perspective of its titular character, and I think it offers as nuanced and complex a look at the character as any we've seen thus far. I like that it makes me uncomfortable. These are good things. Art or entertainment that is easy to digest isn't interesting to me. When it comes to art or entertainment, I want to be challenged, changed, and even offended by what I consume. Light entertainment is all well and good, but I wouldn't talk about it on this channel if that's what Joker was, and I'm glad it's not. I've recently been listening to a musician named Uboa. Their work is some of the most wonderful, beautiful, cathartic, intense, and at times terrifying music I've ever heard, to the point I sometimes feel physically ill while listening to it. Yet, that discomfort is exactly what I want from art. is not pleasant to listen to, but I get a lot of pleasure from it in spite of, or perhaps because of, its intensity. Joker is not as intense. It's not as violent or as harrowing. But, like Uboa, what I liked about Joker is also what makes me uncomfortable. Here I'll go into some of the themes of Joker, so if you haven't seen it yet, you might consider these spoilers. While Joker does make me feel uncomfortable, it's rather refreshing to see a film that doesn't demonize the mentally ill, but rather a system that doesn't support them. It's exciting to see a film that follows someone who becomes a monster without trying to avoid confronting that monstrosity. Perhaps most of all, it's exciting to see how the film explores that monstrosity without losing sympathy for the character. But this is what makes me most uncomfortable, and the main reason I now understand the reactions the film was getting. Not only is Arthur Fleck made to be sympathetic, to some extent his alter ego in Joker is too. But that's not where the film is most irresponsible in my eyes. That would be in a climactic scene wherein Joker is allowed to monologue, to parade his ideas, his motives and beliefs. If you thought a work of fiction should be protected against the same ethical requirements of non-fiction or reportage, then I pose you this question. A question the film itself seems very much aware of. What if, while the character is fictional, the ideas he holds are real? What if his motivations, his position in society and his attitudes are seen in reality? Gotham City in Joker is a thin veneer stretched over current-era America. The issues it faces are exaggerated, but real. Joker's ideas, his motivations, and his justifications of his actions are real. That reality is what people were responding to, and what made me feel so uncomfortable. On one hand, I still believe art can't be held responsible for the interpretations its audience may or may not have. But on the other, I think all media has a responsibility. A responsibility to challenge certain ideas, yes, but also to avoid giving a platform to particular ideas. Joker walks a line it may or may not have crossed, between sympathetic storytelling and acting as a platform for some dangerous ideas, which largely go unchallenged within the film. At the point where ethics and art meet, Joker stands, and it doesn't declare its intentions on either path. Ultimately, I don't know if it's fair to judge the film on such grounds. What responsibility, if any, does it really have? Does my enjoyment of the film limit my perspective, or do my ethical qualms get in the way of better appreciating the film? That's not a comfortable set of questions to answer, and indeed I don't think I have any clear answers myself. But, as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Cheers! Have a good one.